The thunderous crack of a gunshot echoed through the valley as Nora Wilson collapsed to her knees in the muddy street of Redemption Springs, her hands trembling as she watched the retreating silhouette of the man she had given everything to. Her wedding dress, once pristine white, now stained with the red clay of the Montana Territory, 1876. The carriage that should have carried them to their new life together disappeared over the horizon, along with James Bennett and the town's bank funds, leaving Nora abandoned at the altar with nothing but broken promises and the mocking whispers of townsfolk who had warned her about falling for a smooth-talking stranger. "He ain't coming back, Miss Wilson," Sheriff Tate called out, holstering his pistol after firing the warning shot. "And neither is the $12,000 from the bank vault." Nora's vision blurred with tears as rain began to fall, washing away the last traces of the life she had imagined. Just 22 years old, and already she felt as though her heart had been carved from her chest. The daughter of a respected rancher, she had been raised to believe in honor, in promises kept not in men who whispered sweet nothings while plotting to steal everything they could carry. "Miss Wilson, you ought to get out of the rain." The voice was deep, unfamiliar, and Nora looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the stormy sky. The stranger's face came into focus as he knelt beside her, weather-beaten but kind, with eyes the color of a clear summer sky. He removed his wide-brimmed hat, revealing tousled dark hair, and carefully draped his duster around her shoulders. "Name's Dawson O'Malley," he said, his voice carrying the distinctive drawl of Texas. "And I don't mean to intrude on your sorrows, but no one should be left alone on a day like this." The kindness in his eyes nearly broke what remained of Nora's composure. "He said he loved me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Everything was a lie." Dawson nodded solemnly, raindrops clinging to his eyelashes as he offered his hand. "I've been tracking James Bennett for 3 months across 2 territories. He's done this before, Miss Wilson, and none of it is your fault." "You're a lawman?" Nora asked, noticing for the first time the star pinned to his vest. "Texas Ranger," he confirmed, "and I aim to bring him to justice." He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. "But first, let's get you somewhere dry." "I have nowhere to go," Nora admitted, the crushing weight of reality settling on her shoulders. "Pa mortgaged the ranch for my dowry. James has that too." Something fierce flashed in Dawson's eyes. "Then we'll get it back." His hand tightened around hers, solid and reassuring. "I give you my word, Miss Wilson, I'll never leave your side until Bennett faces justice and you have your home again." As they walked toward the hotel, Nora clutched the stranger's coat around her shoulders, her wedding ring catching the faint light before she slipped it from her finger and let it fall into the mud. She didn't yet know if she could trust this ranger's promise, but for the first time since the gunshot had shattered her wedding day, she felt something other than despair, a fragile, dangerous flicker of hope. The Silver Branch Hotel stood as the grandest building in Redemption Springs, though that wasn't saying much. Dawson guided Nora through the lobby, ignoring the curious stares of the hotel patrons who whispered behind their hands at the sight of the abandoned bride and the imposing ranger. "Martha," Dawson called to the proprietor's wife, a stout woman with kind eyes. "Miss Wilson needs a room and some dry clothes if you can manage it." Martha nodded, understanding passing between them. "Of course, Ranger O'Malley, come with me, dear." As Martha led Nora upstairs, Dawson approached the desk where Henry Silverbranch watched with undisguised curiosity. "How long have you known about Bennett?" Henry asked, leaning forward. "Long enough to know he's left a trail of broken hearts and empty bank vaults from Laredo to Dakota Territory," Dawson replied, his voice low. "Came as fast as I could when I heard he'd settled here, but not fast enough to stop the wedding or the robbery." "Shame about the Wilson girl," Henry said, shaking his head. "Her father's beside himself. Doc had to sedate him when he heard about the bank." Dawson's jaw tightened. "Where's the ranch?" 10 miles west. Nice spread. "Or it was, before Harlan Wilson put it up as collateral for his daughter's dowry." Henry's expression darkened. "Bank's looking to foreclose by week's end." "Not if I have anything to say about it," Dawson muttered, placing some coins on the counter. "I need a room too." and information on which way Bennett was headed. Upstairs, Martha helped Nora out of her ruined wedding dress, clucking sympathetically as she provided a simple cotton dress and helped dry her hair. "There now, child," Martha said gently. "You've had a terrible shock, but you're stronger than you think." Nora stared at her reflection in the small mirror, hardly recognizing the pale, hollow-eyed young woman who stared back. "I was so foolish," she whispered. "Everyone tried to tell me, Pa, Abigail, even the Reverend had his concerns. But I wouldn't listen." "Love makes fools of the wisest among us," Martha replied, patting her shoulder. "That ranger, though he's a good man, known him for years, whenever his work brings him through these parts. If he says he'll help you, he will." A knock at the door interrupted them. Martha opened it to find Dawson standing there, hat in hand. "Miss Wilson, if you're feeling up to it, I'd like to discuss our next steps," he said. Nora nodded, thanking Martha as the older woman slipped out. She gestured for Dawson to enter, suddenly conscious of her simple attire and damp hair. "I've sent telegrams to the surrounding towns," Dawson explained, remaining standing respectfully near the door. "Bennett has a 2-hour head start, but he's traveling by carriage with heavy bags. If we move quickly, we can catch him before he reaches the territorial border." "We?" Nora questioned, raising an eyebrow. "It's your money he stole, your future he damaged," Dawson replied. "And I've found that victims of such crimes often heal better when they participate in bringing the criminal to justice." Nora considered his words. The thought of facing James again made her stomach twist, but the alternative, sitting helplessly while her father lost everything, was worse. "I can ride," she said finally. "I grew up on a ranch." A smile flickered across Dawson's face. "I expected nothing less. We'll leave at first light." He moved toward the door, then hesitated. "Miss Wilson, there's something else you should know. Bennett travels with accomplices sometimes. This won't be without danger." "My life as I knew it ended today, Ranger O'Malley," Nora replied, a steely determination hardening within her. "I'm not afraid of danger anymore." Dawson studied her for a long moment. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a hard ride." After he left, Nora sank onto the bed, exhaustion washing over her. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the last traces of her wedding day. As sleep claimed her, she found herself wondering about the ranger and his promise not to leave her side, and why, despite everything, she found herself believing him. Dawn broke with a fierce crimson streak across the Montana sky as Nora met Dawson in the stables behind the hotel. She had traded Martha's cotton dress for riding clothes borrowed from the innkeeper's daughter's sturdy trousers, a loose shirt, and a weathered leather jacket that smelled faintly of hay and horse. "You look ready," Dawson observed, leading a chestnut mare toward her. "This is Penny. She's steady and has good endurance." Nora stroked the horse's velvet nose. "She's beautiful." She looked up at Dawson. "Have your telegrams brought any news?" "Bennett was spotted at a way station 20 miles east," Dawson replied, checking the cinch on his own mount, a powerful black gelding. "Changed from the carriage to horseback. He's traveling light now, which means he's hidden the money somewhere. Or he has it with him," Nora suggested. Mounting Penny with practiced ease, Dawson swung into his saddle. "That's what makes this interesting. If he's hidden it, we need to find out where before we apprehend him." As they rode out of Redemption Springs, Nora glanced back at the town where she'd lived her entire life. The spire of the church where she should have been married rose above the other buildings, and beyond it, the rolling hills led toward her father's ranch, her home, soon to be lost unless they succeeded. "We'll save it," Dawson said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Your father's ranch. I promise you that." The first few hours of riding passed in relative silence. Nora was grateful for Penny's smooth gait as they followed the eastward trail, the terrain gradually shifting from grassy hills to more rugged country. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly, and they stopped to water the horses by a narrow stream. "May I ask you something, Ranger O'Malley?" Nora said as they rested in the shade of a cottonwood. "Dawson, please," he corrected, "and you can ask me anything." "Why are you so determined to help me? Surely catching James is enough for your job." Dawson's expression darkened. 5 years ago, Bennett, though he went by the name Collins, then did the same thing to my sister in Amarillo. married her, took her savings, disappeared. He paused, his hands tightening around his canteen. She couldn't bear the shame, took her own life 3 months later. Nora's breath caught. I'm so sorry. So you see, this isn't just a job for me. Dawson met her eyes. I've been tracking him for years, always one step behind. When I heard he was in Redemption Springs, I rode day and night, but he trailed off, looking away. You couldn't save me from him either, Nora finished softly. No, but I can help you get justice and your father's ranch back. He stood, offering his hand to help her up. And I can make sure Bennett never does this to another woman. As they mounted up to continue their journey, Nora studied Dawson's profile against the sky, the determined set of his jaw, the vigilant eyes scanning the horizon. For the first time, she understood that beneath his calm exterior lay a pain that mirrored her own. There's something ahead, Dawson said suddenly, pointing to a plume of smoke rising in the distance. Could be the way station. They approached cautiously, Dawson signaling for Nora to stay behind him as they crested a small rise overlooking a crude roadhouse. A handful of horses were tethered outside, and a stagecoach stood with its team unhitched. Wait here, Dawson instructed, dismounting and checking his revolver. No, Nora replied firmly, sliding from Penny's back. If James is in there, I want to face him. Dawson looked like he wanted to argue, but instead nodded. Stay behind me, and if there's trouble, get to cover immediately. The roadhouse was dim and smoky inside, with a handful of travelers seated at rough wooden tables. A harried-looking man stood behind a plank bar, serving whiskey from a dubious-looking bottle. Conversations halted as Dawson entered, his height and the star on his chest commanding immediate attention. Texas Ranger, he announced. I'm looking for a man named James Bennett, dark hair, well-dressed, traveling east. The barkeep's eyes flicked nervously to a corner table where a solitary figure sat with his back to the wall. Nora's heart lurched as the man looked up, but it wasn't James. This man was older, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. Don't know no Bennett, the scarred man drawled, but if you're buy-in, Ranger, I might remember something. Dawson approached the table, gesturing for Nora to stay by the door. I'm not much for buying information, he said, his voice deceptively casual as he rested his hand on the butt of his revolver. But I am inclined to arrest those who obstruct justice. The man's eyes narrowed, calculating his odds. Finally, he shrugged. Fella matching that description came through about 3 hours ago. Paid for a fresh horse with a gold watch, nice one too. Said he was heading for Fort Carson. Fort Carson is north, Dawson said skeptically, not east. That's what he said. The man smirked. Course, after he rode out, I saw him turn east at the crossroads. Heading for the territorial line, I reckon. Dawson slid a coin across the table. Anything else? Yeah, he wasn't alone. The scarred man pocketed the coin. Had a lady with him. Pretty little thing, all in black like she was in mourning. They seemed familiar. Nora stepped forward despite Dawson's warning glance. A woman, you're sure? The man's gaze raked over Nora with newfound interest. Well now, you look familiar too. Yeah, I'm sure. Dark-haired woman, fine clothes, called him darling when they mounted up. A wave of nausea swept through Nora. He's already with someone else, she whispered. Dawson gripped her elbow, guiding her back toward the door. Thank you for your cooperation, he called over his shoulder to the scarred man. Outside, Nora leaned against the weathered wall of the roadhouse, trying to steady her breathing. He had someone else all along, she said, the pieces falling into place. That's why he was so insistent we marry quickly, why he needed the money immediately. It's a common trick, Dawson said grimly. The accomplice poses as a sister or friend, helps gain trust, then they split the takings. I'm such a fool, Nora said, bitterness seeping into her voice. No, Dawson replied firmly. You're a victim of practiced criminals. There's no shame in that. He checked the position of the sun. We need to push on if we're going to catch them before nightfall. As they rode east, following a trail now clearly marked by 2 sets of hoofprints, Nora felt her initial shock hardening into determination. James hadn't just stolen her dowry and her father's future, he'd made a mockery of her love, her trust. The humiliation burned, but beneath it something stronger was taking root. Resolve. "Tell me about Texas," she said suddenly, wanting to think about anything other than James and his mysterious companion. Dawson glanced at her in surprise, but seemed to understand her need for distraction. "It's big," he said with a small smile. "Bigger than you can imagine. The stars at night seem close enough to touch, and the land stretches so far you think it might never end. Do you miss it?" "Every day," he admitted. "My family has a small ranch outside of San Antonio. Not as grand as your father's, I expect, but it's home." "Why become a ranger then?" Nora asked. "Why not stay on the ranch?" Dawson was quiet for a long moment. "After my sister died, I couldn't stay. Every corner of the place reminded me of her. The rangers gave me purpose, a way to channel my grief into something useful." He looked at her. "What about you? Have you always lived in Redemption Springs?" "Born and raised," Nora replied. "Never been farther than Helena. Pa always said there was no need to wander when we had everything we needed right there." She shook her head ruefully. "I think that's why James fascinated me so much. He'd been everywhere, had so many stories to tell. And now you're having an adventure of your own," Dawson observed. "Though I expect it's not the one you'd have chosen." "No," Nora agreed, surprising herself with a small laugh. "Chasing my runaway fiancé with a Texas Ranger wasn't exactly in my plans." Their conversation was cut short as Dawson suddenly reined in his horse, holding up a hand for silence. Nora pulled Penny to a stop, listening intently. At first she heard nothing but the rustle of wind through the grass, then faintly the sound of voices carried on the breeze. "They've stopped," Dawson whispered, dismounting and tethering his horse to a scrubby bush. "We need to approach on foot." Nora followed suit, her heart pounding as they crept forward through the tall grass. They came to the edge of a small ravine, where below, a man and woman had made camp beside a shallow creek. Even from a distance, Nora immediately recognized James's tall figure as he bent to gather firewood. The woman with him sat on a fallen log, her dark hair cascading down her back as she sorted through a saddlebag. Something about her struck Nora as familiar, though she couldn't place her. "That's Vivian Mercer," Dawson breathed, his voice barely audible. "She works with Bennett. Poses as his sister or cousin sometimes." "I know her," Nora whispered back, recognition dawning. "She came to Redemption Springs a month ago, said she was passing through to visit family in Helena." A cold realization washed over her. "She's the one who introduced me to James at the Founders' Day dance." Dawson nodded grimly. "They plan these cons carefully. One arrives first, scouts for potential marks, then brings in the other." They watched as James and Vivian conversed, too distant to hear their words but close enough to see their easy familiarity, the casual touches, the intimate laughter. Each gesture was like a knife twisting in Nora's heart. "There," Dawson pointed to a leather satchel propped against a rock near the fire. "That's likely where they're keeping the money." "What's the plan?" Nora asked, her mouth dry. "We wait until dark," Dawson replied. "Once they're asleep, we'll move in. I'll take Bennett, you secure the money." "And if they're not asleep?" Dawson's expression hardened. "Then things get complicated, but remember I promised I wouldn't leave your side, and I meant it." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ravine, Nora and Dawson settled in to wait. The temperature dropped rapidly with nightfall, and Nora found herself shivering despite her jacket. Without a word, Dawson moved closer, offering his body heat without presumption. Nora hesitated only briefly before leaning against his solid warmth. "Thank you," she murmured. "Not just for this, but for everything." "No need for thanks," he replied softly. "Though I admit when I set out to catch Bennett, I didn't expect to find someone like you." Before Nora could ask what he meant, a shout from the camp below drew their attention. James and Vivian were arguing, their voices rising in the still night air. "You promised me half," Vivian was saying, her voice carrying clearly now. "That was our agreement. Plans change," James replied coldly. "I took all the risk in Redemption Springs." That self-righteous rancher's daughter nearly saw through the whole thing. Nora flinched at his words, and Dawson's arm tightened protectively around her shoulders. "You're planning to leave me behind," Vivian accused. "Just like you did to Lucy in Cheyenne." James's laugh was cruel. Lucy was a fool, just like all the others. Just like you if you thought this was anything more than business. The argument escalated, and suddenly there was a flash of metal in the firelight. Vivian had drawn a small revolver, pointing it at James with a shaking hand. "I'll kill you before I let you abandon me," she threatened. James's posture changed, becoming predatory as he circled the fire toward her. "You don't have the nerve, Vive, you never did. We need to move now," Dawson whispered urgently, "before someone gets killed." They scrambled down the slope toward the camp, but they were too late. A gunshot cracked through the night air, followed by a scream. Nora's blood ran cold as they burst into the clearing to find James clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers, while Vivian stood wide-eyed with the smoking gun still in her hand. "Texas Rangers," Dawson shouted, drawing his own weapon. "Drop the gun, Miss Mercer." Everything seemed to happen at once. Vivian turned, startled, her gun swinging toward them. Dawson fired a warning shot above her head. James, seizing the distraction, lunged for the satchel of money and bolted toward the horses tethered nearby. "Stop him." Nora cried, racing after James without hesitation. James reached his horse and was struggling to mount one-handed when Nora caught up to him. Without thinking, she grabbed the satchel, yanking it from his grasp. "You thieving bastard," she spat, all her hurt and rage boiling over. "This is my father's money," James's handsome face contorted with fury. "You stupid little fool," he snarled, backhanding her across the face. Nora stumbled backward, clutching the satchel to her chest despite the pain blooming across her cheek. James advanced on her, but before he could reach her, a powerful form tackled him to the ground. Dawson and James rolled in the dirt, trading blows. Despite his wounded shoulder, James fought with desperate strength, landing a solid punch to Dawson's jaw, but the Rangers' training proved superior. With a swift, calculated movement, Dawson pinned James face down, wrenching his arms behind his back. "James Bennett," Dawson said, breathing heavily as he secured handcuffs around James's wrists, "you're under arrest for fraud, theft, and assault." Nora looked around for Vivian, spotting her slumped by the fire, clutching her arm where Dawson had apparently wounded her during their confrontation. "Is she?" Nora began. "Just a graze," Dawson assured her. "She'll live to stand trial alongside her partner." Nora sank to her knees, still holding the satchel as the reality of what had just happened washed over her. James was captured. The money was recovered. It was over. Dawson secured both prisoners before approaching Nora. Kneeling beside her, he gently tilted her face to examine the red mark where James had struck her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice tender with concern. Nora nodded, suddenly exhausted. "I just want to go home." "We will," Dawson promised. "First light, we'll head back to Redemption Springs." He nodded toward the satchel. "With your father's money safe and sound." As they set up camp a safe distance from their restrained prisoners, Nora found herself watching Dawson, the careful efficiency of his movements, the gentle strength in his hands as he built a small fire. This man who had ridden into her life on the worst day of her existence had somehow become her anchor in the storm. "You kept your promise," she said softly as they sat side by side watching the flames. "You didn't leave my side." Dawson's eyes, reflecting the firelight, met hers. "I'm a man of my word, Miss Wilson." "Nora," she corrected. "After everything we've been through, I think you can call me Nora." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Nora," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Get some rest. We have a long ride tomorrow." As Nora settled into her bedroll, she realized that for the first time since James's betrayal, she felt something like peace. The money was recovered, her father's ranch would be saved, and justice would be served. And somehow, in the midst of all the chaos, she had found someone she could trust, truly trust, in the steady Texas Ranger who had promised to stay by her side. The journey back to Redemption Springs took 2 days, with James and Vivian bound and sullen on their horses. Dawson kept a vigilant watch, rarely speaking except to issue curt commands to the prisoners or to check on Nora's well-being. For her part, Nora found a strange sense of closure in seeing James reduced to this, his elegant clothes dirty and torn, his charismatic smile replaced by a scowl of defeat. The man she had nearly married was a stranger to her now, and with each mile they traveled, the grip of his betrayal loosened a little more. They arrived in Redemption Springs late in the afternoon, drawing curious stares as they rode down the main street. News of their approach had evidently preceded them, for a crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office, including Nora's father. Harlan Wilson stood leaning heavily on a cane, his weathered face lined with a mixture of relief and fury as he spotted his daughter. Despite his weakened state, he pushed through the crowd to meet her as Dawson helped her dismount. "Nora, girl," he breathed, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "I thought I'd lost you too." Nora clung to her father, suddenly aware of how close they had come to losing everything. "I'm all right, Pa." "And look," she held up the satchel, "we got the money back, all of it." Sheriff Tate stepped forward as Dawson dismounted the prisoners. "Well done, Ranger O'Malley," he said, eyeing James and Vivian with satisfaction. "These two have a lot to answer for." "They'll be transported to the territorial capital for trial," Dawson replied. "I've documented similar crimes in 3 other territories." James, his face bruised and his shoulder crudely bandaged, glared at Nora. "You could have had everything with me," he said bitterly as the sheriff took him into custody. "Instead, you chose this backwater town and a self-righteous lawman." Nora met his gaze steadily. "What I chose was honesty, James, something you wouldn't understand." As the prisoners were led away, the crowd began to disperse, many pausing to welcome Nora home or to thank Dawson for his service. Through it all, Dawson remained close to Nora's side, a steady presence that she found herself increasingly reluctant to lose. "You'll stay for supper at least," Harlan insisted, addressing Dawson. "It's the least we can do after what you've done for our family." Dawson hesitated, his eyes meeting Nora's. "That's very kind, Mr. Wilson, but I don't want to impose." "Nonsense," Harlan declared. "We've plenty of room at the ranch, and Martha Silverbranch tells me you're a man who appreciates a home-cooked meal." A small smile crossed Dawson's face. "In that case, I'd be honored." The Wilson Ranch sprawled across a verdant valley, its whitewashed farmhouse gleaming in the late afternoon sun. As they approached, Nora felt a swell of gratitude that this place, her home, had been saved from the auctioneer's gavel. Abigail, the housekeeper who had helped raise Nora after her mother's death, burst from the house as they arrived, enveloping Nora in a bone-crushing hug before turning her critical eye on Dawson. "So you're the ranger who brought our girl home," she said, sizing him up. "And just in time for supper too. Providence, I call it." Supper was a simple but hearty affair: roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread, with apple pie for dessert. Dawson ate with obvious appreciation, complimenting Abigail's cooking with such genuine warmth that the usually stern woman actually blushed. As they ate, Harlan questioned Dawson about the capture of James and Vivian, listening intently to the ranger's measured account. Nora noticed how he downplayed his own role, emphasizing instead her courage in confronting James. "My daughter always did have more spine than sense," Harlan said with gruff affection. "Gets that from her mother." "It served her well," Dawson replied, his eyes finding Nora's across the table. "She's one of the bravest women I've ever met." After supper, while Harlan dozed by the fire and Abigail cleared the dishes, Nora led Dawson onto the wide porch that wrapped around the farmhouse. The evening was mild, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Your home is beautiful," Dawson said, leaning against the porch railing. "I can see why you were so determined to save it. It's been in Pa's family for 3 generations, Nora replied. "He always planned to pass it on to my brother, but after Thomas died in the war." She trailed off, old grief surfacing briefly. "Well, it's mine now, I suppose. You'll do it justice," Dawson said with certainty. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the chirp of crickets in the tall grass. "When do you leave?" Nora asked finally, voicing the question that had been hovering in her mind since they'd returned. Dawson studied the horizon. "I need to escort the prisoners to Helena, then file my report." He paused. "After that, I'm not sure." "You could stay," Nora said softly, surprising herself with her boldness. "Redemption Springs could use a man like you." A lawman, you mean? Dawson asked, his voice carefully neutral. Nora turned to face him fully. A man of his word, a man who doesn't leave. Something shifted in Dawson's expression, a vulnerability breaking through his composed exterior. Nora, he stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. What you've been through, the betrayal, the hurt, it's still fresh. I wouldn't want to take advantage of that. You wouldn't be, Nora replied. The truth is, Dawson, in the worst moment of my life, you were there, not just as a ranger doing his duty, but as a man who saw someone in pain and offered his hand. She took a deep breath. I'm not saying I'm ready for anything. But I know that when you promised not to leave my side, I believed you, and that means something to me. Dawson's hand found hers on the porch railing, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. It means something to me too, he admitted, more than I expected. Before either could say more, the screen door creaked open and Harlan stepped onto the porch. If he noticed their hastily separated hands, he gave no indication. Beautiful night, he commented, joining them at the railing. Ranger O'Malley, I've been thinking. That gelding of yours is a fine animal, but he's trail-weary. Why not leave him here to rest up while you take the prisoners to Helena? We've got a strong bay that could use the exercise. That's very generous, sir, Dawson replied. And when you return for your horse, Harlan continued casually, perhaps you might consider staying on for the summer roundup. We're short-handed since 2 of our hands left for the gold fields, and a man who can track criminals across territories would be mighty useful tracking stray cattle. Nora glanced at her father in surprise. Harlan Wilson was not a man known for his subtlety, but this attempt at matchmaking was unexpectedly delicate. I'd be honored to help, Dawson said, a smile warming his features. If you're sure I wouldn't be imposing. Imposing? Nonsense. Harlan clapped him on the shoulder. Any man who brings back my daughter and my money has earned a place at my table for as long as he likes. He winked at Nora before heading back inside. Don't stay up too late, you two. Morning comes early on a ranch. When they were alone again, Nora couldn't help but laugh softly. Well, that was about as subtle as a herd of buffalo. Your father is a perceptive man, Dawson said, his eyes crinkling at the corners, and a kind one. So you'll come back, Nora asked, trying to keep the hope from her voice. Dawson reached out, his fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. I made you a promise, Nora Wilson. I'll never leave your side, at least, not for long. The days following Dawson's departure for Helena with the prisoners were busy ones at the Wilson ranch. With the money returned to the bank and the mortgage reinstated, Harlan threw himself into preparations for the summer roundup with renewed vigor. Nora, determined to prove herself capable of eventually running the ranch, worked alongside the hands from dawn till dusk, mending fences, checking the herd, and helping Abigail put up preserves for the coming winter. At night, however, her thoughts inevitably turned to Dawson. She found herself recalling the steady timbre of his voice, the reassuring strength of his presence, the way his eyes seemed to see beyond her surface to something deeper within. It both unsettled and comforted her, this growing attachment to a man she had known for such a short time. You're mooning again, Abigail observed one evening as they sat on the porch shelling peas. That's the 3rd time you've sighed in as many minutes. Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. I was just thinking. About a certain tall Texan, no doubt, Abigail replied dryly. Can't say I blame you. He's a sight more substantial than that snake Bennett ever was. It's not like that, Nora protested. Dawson is just, he was kind when he didn't have to be. Abigail's weathered face softened. That's exactly what it should be like, girl. Kindness, when it's not required, that's the mark of a true gentleman. She paused in her shelling. Your mother would have liked him. The mention of her mother, gone these 15 years, made Nora's throat tighten. Do you really think so? I know so, Abigail said firmly. Sarah had no patience for pretense. She would have seen straight through James Bennett, and she would have recognized the worth in your ranger. He's not my ranger, Nora murmured, though the words lacked conviction. 2 weeks after Dawson's departure, word came from Helena that James and Vivian had been formally charged and would stand trial in the territorial court. The letter, delivered by the weekly mail coach, also contained a brief note from Dawson. informing Harlan that he had been delayed by official business but intended to return to Redemption Springs within the fortnight. The note included a short postscript addressed to Nora. "The stars here are not as bright as in Texas, nor as clear as in Montana. I find myself looking forward to seeing them again from your porch." Simple words, yet they set Nora's heart racing. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into her pocket, where her fingers found themselves returning to it throughout the day. True to his word, Dawson returned exactly 2 weeks later, riding into the ranch yard on a borrowed horse as the sun was setting. Nora, who had been watching the road with increasing frequency in recent days, spotted him from the barn where she was tending to a newborn calf. She forced herself to finish her task, to walk rather than run across the yard, to smooth her hair and dust off her apron before greeting him. But when Dawson dismounted and turned toward her, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure at the sight of her, Nora's carefully constructed composure threatened to crumble. "You came back," she said, immediately regretting the obviousness of the statement. "I promised I would," Dawson replied simply, removing his hat. He looked tired but content, the trail dust doing nothing to diminish the impact of his presence. "How have you been, Nora?" "Well enough," she answered. "The ranch keeps us busy." "Pa's in town meeting with the banker, but he'll be pleased you've returned. He's been planning the roundup around your arrival." Dawson smiled. "I'm honored he thinks so highly of my cow-herding abilities." "It's not just that," Nora admitted. "He likes having another man around the place. Someone he respects." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words and tentative possibilities. Finally, Dawson gestured to his horse. "I should see to my mount and get cleaned up. It's been a long ride." "Of course," Nora said, stepping back. "Abigail's made stew and there's fresh bread. I'll tell her to set another place." As Dawson led his horse toward the stable, Nora watched him go, a curious mixture of excitement and uncertainty swirling within her. It was too soon, she told herself. Too soon after James's betrayal to be feeling this strange, tender warmth for another man. Yet there it was, undeniable and growing stronger with each day. Supper that evening was a lively affair. Harlan had returned from town with news of a neighboring ranch's financial troubles, and the conversation revolved around the possibility of purchasing additional grazing land. Dawson listened attentively, offering thoughtful insights based on his observations of ranch operations across the territories. "You know your cattle, Ranger," Harlan said approvingly. "Sure you wouldn't rather be ranching than chasing outlaws?" Dawson's gaze flickered briefly to Nora before returning to her father. "I've been considering a change, actually. The Rangers have been good to me, but after 5 years on the trail, I'm finding myself drawn to a more settled life." "Well, you'd be welcome here," Harlan said with characteristic directness. "We could use a man with your skills and judgment." Later, after Harlan had retired to his study and Abigail to her room, Nora and Dawson found themselves once again on the porch, watching as the last light faded from the sky. "Your father is very generous with his offers," Dawson observed. "He sees your worth," Nora replied. "As do I." Dawson turned to face her, his expression serious. "Nora, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have mentioned before." A flicker of apprehension passed through her. "What is it?" "I've resigned from the Rangers," he said. "Effective once I complete my final report on the Bennett case." Nora's eyes widened. "Because of your sister, because you caught him?" "Partly," Dawson admitted. "Justice for Catherine was what drove me to the Rangers in the first place, but it's more than that." He took a deep breath. "Meeting you, seeing how you faced your pain with such courage, it made me realize something. I've been chasing ghosts for 5 years, using my badge as a shield against really living. And now," Nora asked softly, "now I want to build something," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Something lasting. I thought perhaps, if you're willing, I might start here in Redemption Springs." Nora's heart beat faster. "As a ranch hand," a smile tugged at Dawson's mouth. "For a start, I'm not presuming anything, Nora. I know you've been hurt, and the last thing I want is to rush you. But I'd like the chance to show you that not all men break their promises." Impulsively, Nora reached out and took his hand. I believe you already have shown me that, Dawson O'Malley. His fingers tightened around hers, and for a moment they stood together in the gathering darkness, the future stretching before them uncertain but full of possibility. The summer roundup came and went, with Dawson proving himself as adept with cattle as he had been at tracking criminals. The ranch hands, initially skeptical of the former ranger, soon came to respect his quiet competence and fair leadership. Harlan, watching the easy way Dawson took to ranch life, began to include him in more decisions about the operation, treating him less like a hired hand and more like a partner. And Nora, despite her initial caution, found herself drawn more deeply to Dawson with each passing day. Unlike James, whose charm had been all surface and flash, Dawson revealed himself slowly, in small moments of kindness and integrity. He taught the youngest ranch hand to read during evening breaks. He spent hours helping Abigail repair the chicken coop without being asked. He listened when Nora spoke of her dreams for the ranch, offering suggestions without ever dismissing her ideas. By the time autumn painted the surrounding hills in gold and crimson, Nora knew with certainty that what she felt for Dawson was no mere rebound or reaction to her broken engagement. This was something deeper, more substantial, a connection built on mutual respect and genuine affection. One crisp October afternoon, Nora and Dawson rode out to check on a distant section of fence that had been damaged in a recent storm. The work was quickly completed, and they found themselves with rare leisure time away from the watchful eyes of the ranch. "Race you to the ridge," Nora challenged, already urging Penny into a gallop before Dawson could respond. Laughing, he spurred his mount, the black gelding he had arrived on, now fully recovered from their earlier journey, and gave chase. They thundered across the open grassland, the wind whipping through Nora's hair as she leaned low over Penny's neck. Dawson caught up just as they reached the ridge, both horses breathing hard as they slowed to a walk. Below them, the valley stretched out in autumn splendor, the ranch buildings tiny in the distance. "Beautiful country," Dawson said, dismounting and helping Nora down from her saddle. "It is," she agreed, gazing out over the land that had been her family's for generations. "I never appreciated it properly until I almost lost it." They spread a blanket beneath an old cottonwood and shared the lunch. Abigail had packed cold chicken, biscuits, and apple cider in a stone bottle. As they ate, Dawson told stories of his childhood in Texas, of cattle drives and summer storms and his father's legendary stubbornness. "You miss them," Nora observed. "Your family?" "I do," Dawson admitted. "Though I write to them regularly, my mother has been asking when I plan to visit." He hesitated. "She's also been asking about you." Nora looked up in surprise. "Me? What have you told her?" A faint flush colored Dawson's cheeks. "The truth, that I met a remarkable woman who changed the course of my life." Nora's breath caught. Though they had grown close over the months, neither had spoken openly of their feelings, both cautious after the events that had brought them together. "Dawson," she began, but he held up a hand. "Please, let me say this while I have the courage." He took a deep breath. "Nora Wilson, I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day in the rain, when you stood up despite everything that had happened and decided to fight back." He reached for her hand. "I know it hasn't been long, and I know you have every reason to be wary of men and their promises. But I want you to know that my feelings for you are true, and they're not going anywhere." Tears sprang to Nora's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I've been afraid to admit it, afraid to trust my own heart after being so wrong about James." "But you're nothing like him, Dawson. You never have been." Dawson's face lit with hope. "Does that mean?" "It means I'm not afraid anymore," Nora said simply. "Not with you." Gently, reverently, Dawson leaned forward and kissed her. Unlike the demanding, possessive kisses James had given her, Dawson's touch was tender, a question rather than a claim. Nora responded with all the emotion she had kept guarded for so long, her hands coming up to frame his face as the autumn breeze swirled fallen leaves around them. When they finally broke apart, Dawson rested his forehead against hers. "I'll never leave your side, Nora," he murmured. "That's a promise I intend to keep for the rest of my days." "I'm holding you to that, Ranger O'Malley," she replied, smiling through her tears. As winter descended on the Montana territory, the Wilson Ranch settled into the quiet rhythms of the season. Cattle were moved to sheltered pastures, preparations were made for the cold months ahead, and in the evenings, the farmhouse glowed with warmth and light against the early darkness. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside, the family gathered in the parlor. Harlan, his health improved since the summer, sat in his favorite chair by the fire. Abigail bustled about, making sure everyone had enough mulled cider and Christmas cookies. And Dawson, now as much a part of the household as anyone, helped Nora decorate the small pine tree they had cut from the North Ridge. "This was my mother's," Nora said, carefully unwrapping a delicate glass angel from its tissue paper nest. "Pa says she brought it all the way from Boston when they married." Dawson watched as she placed it on the highest branch. "It's beautiful," he said, "like her daughter." Harlan cleared his throat from his position by the fire. "If you two are finished making eyes at each other, I believe it's time for Christmas gifts." Abigail brought out several packages wrapped in brown paper and tied with red ribbon. There were practical gifts: a new scarf for Nora, leather gloves for Dawson, a pipe for Harlan, and a few surprises. Like the book of poetry Dawson had ordered from Helena for Nora, remembering how she had mentioned her love of Tennyson. "There's one more," Dawson said after the other gifts had been opened. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box, carefully wrapped. The room grew quiet as he handed it to Nora. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unwrapped it, revealing a velvet jeweler's box. Inside, nestled against dark fabric, lay a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the firelight and scattered it in tiny rainbows. "It was my grandmother's," Dawson said softly. "My mother sent it when I wrote to her about you." Nora looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Dawson," he took her hand, his expression solemn yet filled with love. "I know what you went through with Bennett left scars. I know there might be moments when you doubt, when you remember the pain of his betrayal. But I promise you, Nora Wilson, that I will spend every day of our life together proving that love can be trusted, that promises can be kept." He squeezed her hand gently. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, Nora was transported back to another proposal. James on one knee in her father's study, offering a gaudy ring and honeyed words that had turned to ash. But this was different. Dawson wasn't offering her dreams or fantasies. He was offering her himself, honestly and completely. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, I will marry you, Dawson O'Malley." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Harlan raised his glass in a toast. "To new beginnings," he said gruffly, emotion making his voice rough. "And to the finest Christmas gift an old man could ask for seeing his daughter truly happy." They were married in the spring, when the hills were carpeted with wildflowers and the air was sweet with the scent of new growth. The ceremony was held on the ranch, beneath the old cottonwood where they had first confessed their love. Reverend Collins from Redemption Springs officiated, and it seemed the entire territory turned out to witness the event. Nora wore a simple gown of ivory silk, her hair adorned with a crown of wildflowers rather than a veil. Dawson, standing tall and proud beside Harlan as they waited for the bride, wore a new suit ordered from San Francisco and polished boots that reflected the cloudless sky. "You ready for this, son?" Harlan asked quietly as they watched the guests being seated. Dawson nodded, his eyes fixed on the farmhouse where Nora was preparing. "I've been ready since the day I met her, sir." When Nora appeared at the end of the flower-strewn path, a collective murmur went through the gathering. She was radiant, her face glowing with happiness as she walked toward the man who had kept his promise never to leave her side. The vows they exchanged were traditional but deeply felt, each word a covenant between them. When Reverend Collins pronounced them husband and wife, Dawson kissed his bride with such tender reverence that many in the audience found themselves wiping away tears. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from the trees. There was music and dancing, feasting and laughter, and through it all, Dawson kept Nora close, as if unable to believe his good fortune. "Happy, Mrs. O'Malley?" he asked as they swayed together beneath the stars, the sounds of the party fading as guests began to depart. "Completely," Nora replied, resting her head against his chest. "Though I still can't quite believe it's real." "It's real," Dawson assured her, his arms tightening around her. "And it's just the beginning." The years that followed proved the truth of his words. Together, Nora and Dawson transformed the Wilson Ranch into one of the most prosperous in the territory. When Harlan passed peacefully in his sleep 5 years after their wedding, they continued his legacy, expanding the operation while maintaining the principles of fair dealing and hard work that had been his hallmark. Their family grew as well. First came Daniel, named for Dawson's father, a sturdy boy with his mother's curls and his father's steady gaze. 2 years later, Sarah arrived, named for the grandmother she would never meet but whose spirit seemed to live on in her quick laugh and gentle heart. Through it all, the challenges of ranching life, the joys and sorrows that came with building a family, the changing face of the Montana Territory as it moved toward statehood, Dawson kept the promise he had made on that rainy day in Redemption Springs. He never left Nora's side, not in hardship or in celebration, not in conflict or in peace. And Nora, who had once believed that love was nothing but pretty lies and broken promises, found in Dawson a truth that healed the wounds of her past and built a foundation for their future, the truth that some men, when they say, "I'll never leave your side," mean it with every fiber of their being. On their 20th wedding anniversary, with their children grown into fine young adults and the ranch flourishing under their care, Nora and Dawson returned to the cottonwood tree where they had been married. The tree was larger now, its branches spreading wider against the Montana sky, but the view of the valley remained as breathtaking as ever. "You ever think about him?" Dawson asked as they spread a blanket beneath the tree, just as they had done so many years before. "About Bennett." Nora considered the question, realizing with some surprise that she rarely thought of her first love anymore. The pain of his betrayal had faded to a distant memory, overshadowed by 2 decades of genuine love and partnership. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not in the way you might think." "I'm grateful to him in a strange way." Dawson raised an eyebrow. "Grateful to the man who broke your heart and nearly ruined your family," Nora smiled, reaching out to touch her husband's weathered cheek. "If he hadn't done those things, you might never have ridden into Redemption Springs. We might never have met." She shook her head wonderingly. "His betrayal led me to you, and that makes it a price worth paying." Dawson caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I'd have found you somehow," he said with certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Nora O'Malley." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they sat together beneath the cottonwood, their shoulders touching, their hands intertwined. The ranch spread out below them, the legacy they had built together, while behind them, the future stretched endlessly onward, a future secured by a promise made and kept, by a love that had healed old wounds and created something stronger in their place. "I love you," Nora said simply, resting her head on Dawson's shoulder. "And I love you," he replied, his arm encircling her waist. "Always have, always will." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared overhead, they remained beneath the cottonwood. 2 souls joined by a bond that had withstood the test of time, a testament to the power of second chances, of promises kept, of a love that had begun with the words, "I'll never leave your side," and had proven, day after day and year after year, the enduring truth of that vow.